start recording. Okay. So at this point, we've started to do some color painting, right? Let's hope that that catches up here real time. We started to do color painting, right? And we can see that we've got our body color here. And what we could do is we could go in and we could darken some areas. We could lighten some areas, right? One of the things your brushes have in Blender is blend modes, right? You'll kind of notice them right here, right? So if you go up to here, we've got that green brush already. It's a regular draw brush. You'll see there's actually blend modes here. So if you click on what's called mix, right, that'll actually bring this up, and you see there's dodge, there's multiply. These just kind of change the pixels underneath in various ways. Like multiply tends to kind of darken them without painting a straight dark color on there. It darkens the pixels that already exist. Dodge tends to lighten them. Saturation could change if it's more or less saturated, right? Brighter or more grayscale. Kind of things like that, right? So these mix modes really are cool options for kind of lightening or darkening pixels you already have, right? So if I go here and let's say hit multiply, I'm probably going to want to turn my strength down a lot, right? Because I usually don't want to overpower it. So I almost always when I'm painting or sculpting, I have my strength lower because I'd rather build up, right? I'd rather build up what we have. So of course I could zoom in here a little bit. And you see how it's going to kind of darken the pixels in that area a little bit? Maybe turn the strength up a little more so you can see it a little bit easier. But you'll see how it can kind of basically darken the pixels up in areas, right? See how it kind of darkens the pixels there? Maybe that strength's a little too high. So we can just kind of go in here and maybe darken in the cracks and crevices a little bit. Often an ambient occlusion map could do this for you as well. But this is kind of about showing you guys how much you could kind of stylize stuff or specifically control. Like maybe I want the tips darker here, right, than the rest of it. And there, of course, it disconnected. So let me hopefully be able to reconnect here pretty quickly. Come on. It says it didn't disconnect. Come on. Let's try to reconnect this and hopefully not lose too much time. All right. Alrighty. So let's see if that connects back up. How long that's going to give us. Okay. So it looks like that's connected again. Let's see if hopefully it's going to catch up here in a minute. Kind of where we're at, right? Come on. I don't want to have to stop this video and restart it if it's just not going to play well. Alright. Shoot. Alrighty. I'm really not sure how much this is going to work for us. There we go. Okay. So, a couple of minutes there. Let's see, is this going to catch up further? But, you can always just keep darkening areas, right? Rotate around. And this just could be a cool way to kind of modify what you already have, right? You can just kind of darken some areas up. If you switch your blend mode, you can go to color dodge, right? And you could lighten up some areas as well, right? Now in this case, it's using that green I already have. So remember, you could always just kind of pick a different color and maybe set this to more of like a gray. And you said you can kind of lighten up some of this area a little bit. So you have this ability to come in here and use your blend modes to lighten, darken parts up, right? And you can kind of see how it adds a little bit more interesting kind of dynamic to those claw ends there. So this is actually a cool feature, right, in terms of being able to pick your different modes, right, and kind of darken some areas, right? And I know it's showing up kind of hit or miss, but it is working, right? We'll have a video recorded. So you see how we can just kind of go in here and just darken those pixels around there, right? So remember, you have your blend modes up here for your brushes, right? If you ever get B-Painter, you'll see it has a proper layer system, and you'll have blend modes for that, much like you would with Photoshop, right? And so you see how we can get in here, and we could actually just kind of darken up some areas, right? Oftentimes the tip of the claw might be a bit darker or lighter, depending if it's worn or kind of whatever variations occurred in that animal. And I can switch to color dodge, right? And I can go up here. And these could just be kind of cool ways with low strength to kind of just add some variation to parts of your model, right? So It's kind of one of those neat things you can actually do, and I want to make sure you guys saw is that you can actually switch these brushes in and out, right? So like with that color dodge, if I went back and I picked kind of a lighter green again, right? Something like that. Usually I go a little bit mid-color though, so it's not too bright. You see how you can kind of come in here and kind of give even further variation to the belly, right? You can kind of lighten the belly up even more, right? So I often will use this to add further variation, right? I can go in here and I could kind of enhance the leg a little bit more as well. And see how there's just this kind of extra little variation this is going to give you, right? So you can see how kind of we have an even kind of brighter white going to kind of a less kind of a lighter green and then to a darker green, right? So keep that in mind, right? That you can actually go in here and use these to do some really, really neat stuff, right? If I want to, I can switch back to multiply again. I can go in here and I can maybe darken that area up a little bit, maybe kind of a little bit in there, right? And you just add a little bit of this kind of variation in spots as you're working, right? So we can kind of darken that up a bit, darken that up a bit, all right? And this just could be a great way to enhance parts of the model if you want to. Add a little bit of color variation, right? See if we could darken some areas up. So it's kind of one of those neat things that this could do, right? So I wanted to make sure that you guys were getting to see that there is some cool ability to do stuff with just your mixes, right? Right up here. Usually by default it says mix, right? But you can go to multiply. We could always kind of darken a little bit under here a little bit, all right? So despite that one little hiccup, that's actually been holding up pretty well now. The video, the TV. And you can see this is just a cool way to kind of go in here and just kind of add a little bit of color variation, right? So there we go. Bit of color variation. There we go. So don't be afraid to come in here and just kind of do a little bit of work like that, right? I can kind of maybe darken up here a little bit. It does have a little bit of that green tint. It will take whatever color tint you have in there. So if you want it to be more tan, you can always do that as well. So kind of neat, right? Kind of neat that we could do that. Now, of course, one of the other things that we could do, and we've seen this a little bit before as well with our sculpting, is we can actually paint an image on here, right? So I can go back to kind of mix, and I'm going to kind of set my color back to kind of like a more of a neutral white color. And if you go to texture, right, remember you can add a new texture from here, or you can even go down. I find it's a little easier to go down to the little red checkerboard here, right? And then we can click on new, and then we can go to open, right? Because in this case, we actually want to find something that exists already for us. Like here, right? We could find a texture here if we wanted to, or we go to stencils. Might find something a little more interesting there. So we could always kind of take something like this, right? Open image, and we see that's now available, right? Now available. Now, of course, one of the things you could do is you could make sure to go to texture up here, make sure it's on, which it is. I usually switched from tiled to either view plane or stencil, right? Remember, view plane will basically just kind of drop it on the mesh, right? It'll just keep painting it. And if you go to stroke here, you can, of course, turn up that spacing, right? So if I turn that spacing up a lot, you'll see how we can kind of see what it's doing, right? There's a lot more space. Here, I'm going to kind of maybe turn the strength up a little bit. You see how it's kind of stamping it down? So that's kind of one way. If you just want to kind of have some general noise on this, right? Some general color painting. That's one way you could do it, right? You could easily just turn your spacing where you want it to be. 10's a good default unless you specifically want to do something more dynamic. And of course, view plane just lets it kind of keep stamping down that brush. Now, if you switch it to stencil, though, right? So you switch the texture mode here. Remember, you have to kind of make sure your texture is the active one. Go to mapping here in the texture menu, stencil. And you see, here's the stencil itself. And what we could do here is you'll see Alt right mouse button will move it, right? So right mouse button moves the stencil. Shift right mouse button zooms it, right? And control right mouse button rotates it. Now, one of the things you'll notice is alt right mouse button doesn't work for zoom anymore when you have these defaults. So you'd use scroll wheel instead, unless you change the shortcut for that. But alt moves it. Right mouse button. Shift right mouse button scales it. Right mouse button moves it. Control right mouse button rotates it. And then, of course, you can move your camera. And you said you could just paint right on the surface exactly that image, right? So you're not stuck with just how it repeats from that stamping perspective. You can actually really just paint the kind of full image exactly as you see it right on the surface, right? So it's kind of cool that way. It's a bit different than kind of the view plane texturing, right? But remember, right mouse button moves it. Shift right mouse button scales it. Control right mouse button rotates it. You will be without your alt right mouse button for zoom, right? So scroll wheel will have to facilitate unless you want to change that quick key. And what that does, you see that it actually gives us the ability to paint image right on our model, right? So I think that'll be a great place to stop this, right? So I'll just save my scene, and then I'll stop the recording.